What's amazing is Jesus on earth was able to hide his glory, to put on flesh and be fully human and fully God. And for a moment we see in the Bible where God actually takes off or unveils his glory and shows who he is. It's in the story of the Transfiguration. I'm just going to read it. I want you to just soak this in. It's so beautiful. It's so powerful. So listen to this. 6 days later, he took Peter, James, and John to the top of a mountain. No one else was there. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance changed, and his clothing became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly process could ever make it. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. "Teacher, this is wonderful," Peter explained. "We will make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He didn't really know what to say, for they were all terribly afraid. Then a cloud came over them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." Suddenly they looked around, and Moses and Elijah were gone, and only Jesus was with them. As they descended the mountainside, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead, so they kept it to themselves. But they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. Now, before asking him, "Why did the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes?" Jesus responded, "Elijah is indeed coming first to set everything in order. Why then is it written in the scriptures that the Son of Man must suffer and be treated with utter contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and he was badly mistreated, just as the scriptures predicted." First of all, we see a message that says, the Father says, "This is my beloved Son. This is my Son. Listen to him." It's really cool because a theme in the book of Hebrews in chapter 1, it talks about listening to Christ. In the last days, God has spoken to us through his Son. Many times, in many ways, God spoke through the prophets and spoke through all these different ways, right? But in these last days, he's spoken to us through his Son. And therefore, chapter 2 says we should pay much closer attention to what we have heard. We should pay close attention and not neglect our salvation. We need to, today, if we hear his voice, not harden our hearts like the fathers in the wilderness did in the rebellion, and they hardened their hearts and they weren't able to hear from God. But we have the privilege of hearing directly from Jesus as we go into his word and ask the Holy Spirit to open our eyes to see how beautiful he is. What's amazing is that Elijah represents the prophets, and he represents the side of Jesus that was prophetic and miraculous in the power of God. Elijah represented the power of God, and Moses represented the law of God. Jesus said he came to fulfill the law, and Jesus is also a prophet like Moses. So Elijah and Moses are foreshadows of Christ. Another interesting key is that God both spoke to Moses and Elijah on mountains, and Jesus was there on the mountain. And there's just something special in the Bible about mountains, because it was Mount Sinai where Moses went up and met with God, right, and received the law. And it was Mount Carmel, right, where God defeated the prophets of Baal. In verses 9 and 10, Jesus said, "Don't speak about this until I'm raised from the dead," because they wouldn't understand it yet. And it wasn't Jesus' timing to reveal this transfiguration yet. And what's really interesting is that even when Jesus, when he died, even the disciples still doubted that he would rise again. Yet Jesus told them many times, "I'm going to rise again, I'm going to rise again, I'm going to rise again." But they just somehow forgot, or just it went over their heads. And you see, they would realize that only through the dying could Jesus show his power over death and his authority to be king of all. The disciples would not be powerful witnesses for God until they had grasped this truth. It was natural for the disciples to be confused about Jesus' death and resurrection because they could not see into the future. We, on the other hand, have God's revealed word, the Bible, to give us the full meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection, so we have no excuse for our unbelief.